Welcome to this lively discussion, Rebuilding the Plane Mid-Flight, Academic Libraries Responding to Crisis. My name is Audrey Powers, and I am co-moderator for the session along with Stephanie Jacobs, who will speak next.
Thank you, Audrey. So I wanted to quickly say that the goal of this discussion is to give you a sense of the challenges that we have faced and the changes in procedure and services at our libraries during and after the COVID-19 pandemic shutdown. Afterwards, we would love to hear about you and your experiences. So our presenters are pictured here in the order they'll present, and they will introduce themselves before they start to present. Our discussion today will cover technical services, electronic resources, public services, we'll give a vendor's perspective, and we'll tackle copyright issues. So we do want to deliver our presentation without stopping for questions, but please do put your questions in the chat as they come up, or raise your hand and ask them afterwards. Again, we do want to hear about your experiences, and we will open the floor at the end to enable discussion about how this paradigm shift has potentially restructured how academic libraries function now and in the future. And when we begin the discussion portion, you can raise your hand to have your audio and video turned on. So let's get started. Thank you for being here. We'll start with Gabi.
Thanks, Audrey, and thanks everybody for joining us today. My name is Gabi Weirsma, and I am the Director of Collection Management at the University of Colorado Boulder Libraries. In my role, I oversee most of the technical services operations except for cataloging, so I'll be sharing some of the ways that we have responded to the crisis by revising our services and workflows. So when the libraries closed in mid-March, it definitely felt like we were making a crash landing to get us through the end of the academic year and the end of our fiscal year. The closures happened right before our typical ordering deadlines and also before we had a chance to process a lot of the print books and receive our final approval plan shipments. So one of the first things that we did was contact our vendors and ask them to hold shipments and also to request electronic invoices for any open orders. It was really surprising to me how many invoices we were still getting mailed to us in a physical form and then passed from one person to another. So another thing we did was create a dedicated email address for invoices so that one person wasn't responsible for all of the communications. This also enabled us to streamline the workflow so that we could pass the invoices electronically from one person to the next and then share them in an online folder once they had been processed. We've also had to completely redefine our rush processing procedures. Nothing really happens quickly anymore because we have limited staff on site, but we're also taking more time to ensure that materials are handled safely. We've been following the Realm studies and other related research projects to guide and develop our own safe handling procedures. For example, we're quarantining materials when they are returned to us, and internally we're dating all of the materials so it's really clear when something was last handled. Generally, we're trying to limit how often materials are passed from one staff member to the next, especially before they get passed through a patron through our contactless pickup service. Another really major change we made was revising our approval plans to accept ebooks only. We needed a way to limit the number of print books that we were ordering, and we also wanted to maximize the number of ebooks that we could make available to our users. As a general rule, we don't purchase materials in more than one format, but over the last few months, we've made a lot of exceptions to purchase ebooks and streaming videos, even if we own a physical format. We've also set up a lot of new ordering channels with streaming video and ebook providers to help us accommodate requests for digital content. And even though our on-site staffing capacity is very limited right now, we've resumed ordering for physical materials for certain disciplines like art, music, and non-English language materials because they really rely on print formats and they don't have good online coverage. To their credit, many publishers threw us life jackets by offering extended trials to ebooks, journals, and other scholarly content. We were very selective about the trials that we activated and promoted, in part because trials are a lot of work for us to manage, but we also wanted to try to manage expectations for our users and vendors alike. We greatly appreciated when our ebook aggregators were able to remove concurrent user restrictions, and we're also very grateful for publishers who offered to extend access to things like textbooks or course materials. CU Boulder is a member of the HATI Trust, and we joined the Open Library Initiative in order to gain access to the National Emergency Library and to activate a HATI Trust Emergency Temporary Access Service in the spring. It's been great to have expanded access to digital materials that are in our print collection, but we've definitely heard from our users that some of our ebooks are not easy to use, and some of them do miss having access to our print collection. Relying on e-resources has also highlighted some of the disparities in coverage and availability for ebooks and other electronic resources. We've really struggled to purchase or license all of the things that our faculty and students need, either because they don't have an online equivalent, or the online version is cost prohibitive or not sold to libraries. Ebooks and streaming videos tend to be more expensive than print books or DVDs, and shifting our collection strategy to e-only is really going to have a long-term effect on both our budget and the composition of our collection. The widespread library closures have also highlighted the importance of interlibrary loan services for us. Due to our limited on-site staffing capacity, we're still unable to loan or borrow print or other physical materials. CU Boulder is typically a net lender, but we also rely on a robust resource sharing network in order to satisfy the needs of our diverse academic community. We're also feeling the impact of our reduced ILL services on our collections budget. We did a fair amount of purchase on demand through ILL before the pandemic, but we've seen a noticeable increase in the demand and expenditures from this service because we're having to buy more books that we just can't borrow. I think this is just one of many domino effects that we've experienced as we made changes to our services and operations. Next slide, please, Audrey. And I think like many libraries, we've had to make a lot of these changes quickly, and things are still very much in flux. We still have a large backlog of materials from the spring that continues to grow since we're unable to keep up with processing new materials. Luckily, we've learned to adapt to new information and circumstances a lot more quickly in this time. And we've also done a lot of cross-training so that we're able to help each other if one area gets short-staffed. I totally agree with the keynote speaker this morning that this is really a moment for us to think creatively, and I'm sure that we'll be able to continue to adapt to meet the growing and changing expectations of our new teaching and learning environment. Our stacks are still closed, and we are only offering to do electronic course reserves this year, so that's a big change for us. We started offering contactless pickup services in the fall, which has been really popular, but people still really miss having access to the library and are clamoring for us to open our stacks and let them back into our spaces. I think it was easy for us to take our print collections for granted, but having the library closed and the stacks closed has really underscored the value of our print and physical collections. And I hope that we'll all keep that in mind as we figure out where the libraries go from here. So these are just a few examples of the changes that we've made at our institution, and I look forward to hearing ideas from my fellow panelists as well as from the audience when we get to the Q&A. And with that, I will pass the mic over to my colleague Esther to hear about e-resources at the SUNY Consortium.
Thanks, Gabby, and hello, everyone. I'm Esther Tostiati. I'm the Shared Collections Coordinator for the SUNY Library Services. I help coordinate consortial e-resource procurement, access and management, as well as other collections initiatives for the SUNY Libraries Consortium. Our consortium is comprised of 60 schools. Half of those are community colleges, and the rest are a mix of research universities, academic medical centers, liberal arts colleges, and colleges of technology. All of our libraries moved to a shared Alma and Primo environment in July of 2019, and the team that I'm part of provides support services to the libraries for those shared technologies as well as other initiatives. So the pandemic fast-tracked a lot of changes that we were already working towards, and I'm just going to talk about a few of them. The first one being leveraging the Alma Network Zone for managing consortial access to e-resources. So early on in the shift to online learning, many vendors offered free trials and extended access to their products. So rather than having all of our campuses activating these resources individually in Alma, we utilized Alma's Network Zone and activated a few of the larger databases that were relevant to the majority of our campuses. We did run into a few hiccups initially activating these resources, but worked with Ex Libris to iron those out. And once they were resolved, the campuses were happy to not have to worry about managing access to these resources. We found that the Network Zone, once it was working correctly, we found it to be a really efficient way to set up and manage access to a large number of campuses relatively quickly, which we found to be a great asset, especially in March when campuses made that quick transition to online-only instruction. So another one of our priorities was helping campuses optimize their collections for an online learning environment. And we did this in several ways. The first was that we offered a collection analysis service where we looked at campuses' e-resource subscriptions to help them identify potential cancellations or suggest utilizing on-demand article purchasing or ILL alternative access methodologies. So on average, for the campuses that we provided this service to, we ended up identifying potential cancellations of around 25% of their collections budgets, which was very helpful to them because most of our campuses have seen around 10 to 25% cuts to their budgets this year. Another service that we offered was helping campuses identify online access to their print resources, particularly their course reserves. So we again utilized Alma's Network Zone, the analytics component, to pull circulation statistics for our campuses and identified overlap in their current subscriptions. And then we worked with ProQuest and EBSCO to identify ebook availability on their respective ebook aggregator platforms. And this helped our campuses quickly identify and procure some high-use titles for their students and faculty. Finally, we were already moving towards more consortial collection building before the pandemic started. But as I mentioned earlier, the change to online really fast-tracked our efforts. And we have a number of projects going on, but I'm just going to mention a few. We're currently coordinating a shared ebook DDA on the ProQuest eBook Central pilot or platform. We're coordinating that for 2 separate cohorts of campuses. We're hoping to have about 15 campuses participate in each cohort. This is our first shared DDA since we've moved to Alma, so we're really excited to see how we can utilize this shared infrastructure to kind of streamline access and management for the DDA pilot. We're also working to increase the number of consortial e-resources that we license. We currently only license a handful of resources centrally, namely Elsevier Science Direct, and as well as a package of databases from EBSCO. So we're targeting resources that are in high demand at a majority of our campuses, or ones that meet procurement spending thresholds that require extra levels of approval, as those thresholds are much lower right now than they normally are with the COVID-related budget constraints. So we're hoping to make procurement more efficient for our campuses by establishing more central licenses. And we're also looking to secure centralized support for open access, such as, for example, discounts on article publication charges for SUNY-affiliated authors. You can go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So looking ahead to the future, I'm seeing 2 major themes that emerged from our experience with the pandemic. So one of those is the digital user experience. So in our experience, the pandemic kind of exacerbated a lot of problems that we were already familiar with in the academic library user experience. So I think when most of us think about user experience, we think about web design elements. We think about cluttered web pages or scrolling marquees or difficult to navigate platforms. But there's another side to the digital user experience at academic libraries that I think we're all really familiar with. Article paywalls, ebook DRM that only lets us download a single chapter from a title, and more recently databases with really invasive cookies that are collecting and tracking information about our users. And in many ways, this user experience, it's a feature, it's not a bug, right? It's a symptom of our scholarly publishing ecosystem that's focused on gatekeeping. It intentionally excludes some of us whose universities can't afford to pay for access to that content, which brings me to the second theme of our pandemic experience. And that is that the financial impacts of this pandemic are going to necessitate more shared collection building initiatives for us. So over the next few years, our libraries are going to continue to see reductions in their ability to license and purchase scholarly content. So initiatives such as resource sharing, shared print archives, controlled digital lending, whole ebook ILL, these are the types of initiatives that I think will be necessary to ensure that our students and faculty can continue to access the resources that they need. And not only that, I think initiatives like these are going to allow libraries to engage as active participants in normalizing shared collection building, and let us take part in rebuilding this scholarly infrastructure so that the work that we do doesn't continue to exacerbate this digital divide that so many of us have experienced and are continuing to experience throughout this pandemic. So thanks, everyone. I'm now going to hand it over to Audrey Powers.
Thank you, Esther. I am Audrey Powers, a student success librarian at the University of South Florida. So my question is, how was public services affected by changes in library services during the pandemic? So what we did was we increased the production of digital learning objects. We included videos, LMS modules, library guides, and website renovations. Fortunately, just before the pandemic hit, the library was reorganized and our unit became the Student Success and Instruction unit. And we have a total of 45 Canvas modules that we've developed, but in the summer, we made a huge effort to develop instructional modules to roll out in the fall. So we made 9 modules for undergraduates and 4 for upper level undergraduate and graduate students. So for example, some of the modules that we created were going down the rabbit hole, finding relevant information for your papers. I checked out a month ago and there were 170 students who had actually rolled in that module. I also created Help, I Need This, How Do I Find It? And there were 554 students who enrolled in that module. And I know that keeps going up because I keep getting notices every day about who's gone into it and actually signed up for it and did it. I also created a database searching, creating an effective search strategy. And I did a pre-test and a post-test. And the increase in the score was 11%. So we feel like our modules that we created were very effective. As we revised the library website for instruction, with these new online learning modules, we created 15 new videos. We developed a comprehensive spreadsheet that combined all the learning activities we had created. Modules, videos, websites, and LibGuides, which enabled instruction librarians to push the learning objects out to faculty prior to the onset of the fall semester. We proactively participated in virtual online reference source services, and our unit assisted information technology with answering faculty questions about software and hardware issues as we entered a totally online environment. Additionally, other library departments participated in the development of videos, such as COVID-19 Data and Information Hub, checked out materials, the Welcome Back video, and our seat reservation system. And those you can see on our library website, which can be seen on our library website. In terms of direct support for patrons, we charged out and mailed newly acquired library computers to students for the entire semester. We also mailed print books to patrons. We changed the return time for the books and we did not levy fines. And we were updated regularly by the dean, who offered staff input for safety measures. And now I'll pass the presentation over to the next speaker, Stephanie Jacobs.
Thank you, Audrey. So as Audrey said, my name is Stephanie Jacobs. I am also part of the Library Student Success Unit at the University of South Florida. I'm the liaison librarian for the English department, but I am also a blended blended instructional design librarian. That means that I'm available to help my fellow librarians with things, with the creation of things like online learning modules and things like instructional video content. That's kind of my specialty. So as Audrey mentioned, we did see a marked increase in the production of digital learning objects of all different kinds during the shutdown, including videos, learning content, and LibGuides. In particular, I did spearhead the creation of many new instructional videos on many different topics. Some of them were pandemic specific, such as when I partnered with the library administration to create a video about the socially distanced seat reservation system, or more general. Others were more specifically on accessing library resources from home, particularly for students and faculty that maybe hadn't done that before now. So overall, I believe I created or worked on about 15 new videos during the spring and summer of this COVID time. And overall, the new video content that was created has seen increased viewership to the tune of about 4,000 views for all the combined videos that were created during this time, which is, I will say, a larger number than usual. We do keep statistics on our views, and they're usually less than that. So as Audrey mentioned, we as a group, the LSS department, we were working on these Canvas-based library information literacy workshops before the pandemic actually occurred, which was so incredibly timely because it gave us sort of a menu of instruction options that were not face-to-face. So we don't intend for these online workshops to completely replace face-to-face instruction, but rather they're a way for students and faculty to access library instruction in a remote setting. And again, I would say that's so incredibly timely. They offer the students and faculty kind of a menu for library instruction. So I also personally leveraged my unique skill set to help where it was needed. Audrey mentioned the help desk. I worked with the library administration on a few different pandemic-related videos. I also participated in the online teaching and learning assistance triage program that was headed up by the Innovative Education Department. Essentially, we made ourselves available to faculty who were unsure about how to go about moving their courses online, unsure about how to use certain technologies such as Teams, Kaltura, Camtasia. We helped with Canvas. Basically anything that faculty found themselves unsure about how to use, we were there to work through the issues with them. And I think that was very much appreciated. Personally, I also found it very important to display an increased responsiveness to my faculty. There was a lot of faculty anxiety at the beginning of the shutdown. So I made sure to reach out to my faculty to let them know that I was there for them, albeit remotely, and that I was still working, again, remotely, and to remind them of the services that I and the rest of the library provided for them and their students. And of course, to note what resources were and were not available during the shutdown, and also to direct them to our official guides on the subject. So I also saw an increase of requests for me to help people locate open access and low cost or free resources, which I did, as well as directing them to our specific open access guides that were created by my colleagues specifically for the pandemic shutdown. Also, we found it really, really useful and important to create and maintain guides of pandemic-specific resources, as I believe Audrey mentioned. So overall, it was an incredibly unique experience for me, both as a liaison librarian and as an instructional designer. And I think there were some valuable lessons and takeaways to take to the future. And I would love to hear other people's perspectives on the topic, but trying not to take too much time. So I will turn it over to Rebecca Sager, and thank you so much.
Stephanie, thank you so much. Again, my name is Rebecca Sager. I'm the Vice President for Institutional Participation and Strategic Partnerships at JSTOR. While we're obviously not a library, but a content provider, JSTOR wouldn't exist without the library community we serve, and we approached the crisis through this lens. Back in February, which feels like a lifetime ago, we observed the closures in China and Italy with concern for the impact on education and research, and began talking internally about ways to support the communities. Kind of later on in February, as the virus spread and the impact was felt more widely, we started hearing from a couple of institutions in the US saying in the unlikely event they had to close for a couple of weeks, was there anything JSTOR could do to help them have access? So at that point, we realized that we needed to really get into focus, and we formed a crisis team. And our crisis team was not formed to set up and figure out how to help Ithaca and JSTOR get through the crisis. It was squarely focused on what we could do to help the communities we serve. And we created a program internally called Supporting Our Participants. And we began our work in earnest on March 12th, which again feels like a lifetime ago. Our first step was really to identify the biggest challenges where JSTOR could play a role in helping the community. What could we do? I've got a couple listed here. You know, the restricted access to physical resources, particularly print books, as Gabi mentioned. We knew that that was an immediate need, that we could find a way to support the community. And our response to that was probably the fastest project I've ever executed with an organization. It was very quickly. Between the time period of March 12th through March 18th, we reached out to hundreds of publishers and internally built the mechanisms to provide access to all unsubscribed content in our archive collections, as well as a collection of over 30,000 ebooks from nearly 100 publishers that we made available upon request to our participants. At that point, would be enough time getting them through the semester. And the speed, again, which it all came together from internal systems. Everybody was just laser focused on getting this done and helping as quickly as possible. The response of the publishing community, which was done one at a time, was absolutely incredible and quick, and they were eager to support as fast as possible. So on March 18th, we launched these initiatives worldwide. Again, they were optional to sign on to. And nearly 4,500 libraries worldwide have benefited and signed up for this and chose to offer this access. We launched a website as well at that time with broad information on supporting libraries' immediate needs. And that was, again, as I said, one of the fastest projects I've ever worked on to get up and running so quickly within 6 days. Was enormously rewarding. Other challenges we saw that we felt we needed to make some immediate steps: access barriers. We knew that there would be issues worldwide with access due to the speed of the remote shift, where libraries didn't have, especially in certain communities around the world, didn't have time to prepare in advance. We extended, some of the things that we did were extending browser pairing, which is where users are, once they're authenticated on their network, they can continue to get into JSTOR. That normally lasted 30 days. We extended that through to the end of June, and subsequently we've extended that well beyond that time period. So they wouldn't need to re-authenticate in case they weren't able to get back onto their organization's network. We ran webinars, we pulled together webinars and detailed information on how to ensure remote access would be as seamless as possible given to the library community. And there was much more, and we continue to make improvements and work with the community to ensure access is obtainable wherever you are. Another thing we were able to do was we had we were working on the process of possibly publishing a public health journals archive collection. And through that project, we had already digitized the full runs of more than 25 important journals in public health. Clearly, there is a need for as much information out there as possible. We made that content working with the publishers, made that content freely available to the entire world. And again, that was something that the publishing community supported as well. Lastly, there was the issue of unaffiliated scholars and users, the folks that walk into institutions and public libraries and use content, and they were going to be shut off. We did have a register and read program, which previously had allowed 6 articles to be read monthly. but we expanded that to 100 articles to be able to be freely read monthly by any individual who registers with JSTOR. And that has been nearly 2 million people have registered for that program. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you. So those were some of the many steps we took to help the immediate need. We have, I should mention, we also have subsequently expanded that access as the crisis wore on. We expanded the access to the unsubscribed journals collections through to now to the end of June next year. As we evaluated what was happening this fall, we determined it was important to continue that program for another semester. We extended the book program to the end of August to get through summer classes. And much more. But at a certain point, realized, we were helping that immediate need, but there was another more pressing, looming crisis ahead, and that was the economic impact of COVID-19. So we, we knew that we needed to think that through. And for the first time, this is really a global issue, and nearly all of our library participants were going to be feeling some economic impact of this crisis. It wasn't just one economy or one, natural disaster. It was worldwide. We know we exist because of this community, and we needed to be prepared to feel the impact as well. If you're going to feel pain, if we're going to make it through this crisis together, we may have to feel some pain too. And we don't call ourselves internally a vendor on purpose. We feel that we're in partnership with the community, and now was the time for us to show that. And it may sound a bit corny, but we wanted to be able to look in the mirror at the time when this crisis winds down, sooner, hopefully, rather than later. We want to be able to say we made a difference, and we understood what the community's pain was. So we felt like our response needed to be fair and equitable across the world. We did not want to be in a situation where we were negotiating for price reductions here and there, and it became out of scope, and it just was uncontrollable because everyone was feeling the pain. And we knew also, based on feedback from the library community and feedback from our library advisory group, that the timing of the impact, and our board of trustees as well, but we knew the timing of the impact was going to be varied, that you might be feeling the pain this year, you might feel it next year, it might be the year after where the impact was felt the most. And through that, we developed and enacted by July what we called a $4 million fee relief program. And this is a cost our organization is going to bear to help support our community. We have announced anywhere from a 3.5% up to 5% fee relief, meaning the price you're paying for your 2021 JSTOR subscriptions and Art Store subscriptions is available to you as a form of a credit. If you need to apply it to this year's renewal or next year or the year after, you get to choose and define when you need it the most. We also announced at the same time, though we've never had a price increase on our archive collections, we announced again that we were not going to start now, that we would absolutely not use that fee relief program and try to make it up with price increases. We announced a 3-year price freeze, so there was not going to be an increase during that time. So you knew that you won't have to worry about that. And again, it is something that was important to our organization, that we might have to feel some pain. We are trimming costs. We are, seeing some of the same types of budget reductions that libraries are feeling, and it's the right time for us to do that. So when we think about what the long-term impact this could have on our organization and the community, we're up to more than 26 million uses. I think the slide might be 25 million, but the usage is growing of this expanded access content. That has shown us clearly that there's a desire to access that's not met by our current business model. So we're really revisiting and reviewing and seeing if there's ways we can adapt to ensure that there's sustainable ways in which we can provide access to this content that's clearly being used. There is more seamless remote access options in place, and that needs more attention, particularly in underserved areas. We recently improved Google Casa access, and that work is just ongoing. We know that we want to continue to find ways to support the community. And another area of focus is how we can continue to support faculty that are integrating JSTOR materials into teaching. Are there ways we can simplify that? And we spend quite a bit of time working with academics and libraries on these issues. So We expect that the impact will be lasting and it will be in a way that speaks to the community and supports them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the fantastic Liisa Schmidt at the University of South Florida.
Thank you, Rebecca. Well, as Rebecca said, I'm Liisa Schmidt. I'm the Copyright and Intellectual Property Librarian at the University of South Florida, and I provide information and education to faculty, staff, and students, but I'm not a lawyer, so I do not provide legal advice. In our library, I also give input on creating processes and policies that can help the library provide materials and services within the bounds of copyright law and exceptions in copyright law. So where copyrighted materials were concerned, libraries and publishers both reacted quickly to the unprecedented shift of higher education to online teaching in the last half of the spring 2020 semester. Speaking from the perspective of libraries, we found ourselves in a situation where we were confronted by the amount of copyright protected print material on which our users still rely and need access to. We had to figure out a way to provide access to the materials that users needed and how we could continue our popular services in a purely virtual environment. So comfortable workflows for electronic reserves, like the one we use at our library, were no longer as useful as many requests suddenly needed a lot more analysis and triage. To address this, librarians specializing in copyright law issued a statement on how fair use applies to emergency remote teaching and research. The statement was used as a guideline for our libraries and others who were trying to understand how services like reserves and document delivery could be made available to faculty who would normally be relying on the physical library collection for required course materials. HathiTrust's Emergency Temporary Access Service provided HathiTrust member library patrons special emergency access to materials they would normally be able to obtain from their library's print collection. Similarly, the Internet Archive released a temporary emergency library, which is often seen as an extension of the controlled digital lending initiative that the Internet Archive has been developing in partnership with libraries to provide enhanced access to print materials. Now, publishers also stepped up with temporary programs, allowances, and special licenses that expanded the materials that library users could access electronically and provided users with easy-to-obtain licenses to do activities online that would normally be done in person, like read-aloud sessions. The Copyright Clearance Center, an organization working on behalf of publisher and author rights, also issued a specialized license scheme for educators. Now, the enhanced access by shared libraries and expanded publisher access did a lot of heavy lifting to help libraries connect faculty with the material needed for courses. Next slide. So what does this mean for us now and in the future? Many of our institutions had been working prior to spring 2020 to expand the catalog of classes that were offered online, ours included. Librarians helping course designers and faculty with this process were already encountering questions of format shifting print materials or analog materials that had not been offered electronically or streaming by their rights holders. This issue has only become magnified now that we are facing the challenge of providing more or all of course content online over multiple semesters. The solutions created to address spring 2020 are expired or aging in a way that they are no longer as helpful 2 semesters later. The expanded application of fair use encouraged by the statement of copyright specialist librarians was based firmly in the immediacy in which the materials were needed and the inability for any of us to plan ahead for moving classes online in March. Fair use is still very much an option that faculty and librarians can make use of when evaluating materials for courses. But we can no longer say in our fair use arguments that we've had no time to plan, no time to acquire licenses, and no time to purchase electronic alternatives because of this emergency situation. We've now had over 8 months to do all those things. Now, a library's ability to make use of HathiTrust ETAs to provide electronic access to collections is contingent on the library being closed and unable to provide any in-person services. Now, as HathiTrust member libraries and their campuses begin to open in any capacity, access to digital versions of print holdings is ending. The temporary emergency library by the Internet Archive was prematurely closed in response to a lawsuit brought against the Internet Archive's controlled digital lending program by 4 major publishers. Expanded access programs and licensing schemes offered by the CCC and publishers are also coming to an end or have expired, and yet we still do not have solutions for copyright protected material that is not being format shifted to digital versions by the rights holders. Instead of leading their library in a search to obtain material or a license to share material in online classes, librarians may be turning towards encouraging faculty to use alternative content that is already available or content that is released as an open educational resource or OER. OERs are part of an open access movement where creators of content release materials without most copyright or licensing restrictions. I would postulate that increased encouragement to use OERs could result in increased production of OERs and digital learning objects, growing the amount of digital and free-to-use materials that instructors have access to. Libraries may even encourage the creation of OERs and outreach efforts for institutional repositories. And this is something that I'd really be watching as we look into the future for how to get course reserves materials or any course materials. So now I'll turn it over to our co-moderator, Audrey Powers.
Thanks, Lieta. So now it's a chance for us to hear from you guys, to ask us questions. We have a few questions here to spark our thoughts and some prompts, but we would like to hear from you. So feel free to ask any questions by raising your hands to speak, and our facilitator will turn on your audio and video, or use the text chat for the same purpose. And feel free to direct your questions to a particular presenter or to the group.
Hi, Audrey. This is your facilitator. I'm not seeing any hands raised right now, and I don't see any oh, there's one. Karen, I'm gonna unmute you if I can.
Okay, thanks.
There you go.
Thank you. I have a question for Gabi. University of Colorado Boulder. One of the things you mentioned was that you shifted your print approval plans to e-only. Do you anticipate going back to print approval plans in the after times, or will you stay with e-only, or will you revise your profiles? What's your thinking on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen. I think we initially made the changes thinking they would be more of a temporary solution to get us through the end of the semester. But now that the pandemic is kind of dragging on and it's looking like it's going to be at least through the end of this fiscal year, we're going to keep them at least for this fiscal year, but we are thinking ahead to we saved copies of our comprehensive approval plans that had the print, and we want to be able to run background reports to see what would have matched as a print book so that we know, or we can potentially identify the gaps that, we weren't able to get as ebooks, and hopefully maybe at some point in the future, if budgets allow, kind of fill in. So I do see us going back to a combination of print and ebooks at some point in the future, but it really depends on when we'll have the staff on site to process those types of materials. So right now, physical processing, I think, is kind of limited, and ordering is limited to things that are needed for course reserves, being asked for by faculty or students, or in certain subject areas like music and art and foreign languages, which we really can't get good electronic access to.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
We've got a question for Esther. Esther, how did you determine resources to cancel? Was it cost per use, usage alone, price, or other concerns?
In general, we did look at cost per use, but we also looked at whether or not canceling the resource would have an impact on the campus's programs. We looked at if there was significant overlap with other resources that the campus was already subscribing to, but in general, it was cost per use.
And Esther, there's another question for you regarding ILL. This is from Eric Chow. We've seen that in his consortium as well, not just leaning on ILL for pandemic response needs, but also as a Kickstarter for shared collection building, as you mentioned at SUNY. Is shared collection cancellation part of your group's discussions as well? And by that, he means making sure that people distribute cancellations thoughtfully in order to keep the ILL ecosystem well stocked for most everyone's needs.
I think in the long term, yes, Eric, that would be part of our our strategy, but we're not quite to that point yet. We haven't done a lot of shared collection building in the first place. So not yet, but I love that idea, and it's definitely where we're headed.
This is a general question for all the panelists, and I think it's a great question. What strategies did you use to address resource access issues for students based outside the U.S.?
Well, I'll go first. We really don't have a problem with that because we have our students sign in. If they're currently a registered student, they sign in and they can use any of the resources that we have. So no matter where the student is, that's not an issue for us.
We also have a VPN, or a virtual private network, that the students can download, and that also helps them access things from other countries.
Great. This is a question for Stephanie. Can you say more about the spreadsheet you used to track, whoa, it jumped. The spreadsheet you used to track all of your learning objects, was it collaboratively developed?
Actually,
go ahead.
Audrey mentioned that spreadsheet, but we did develop that together. And so, yeah, Audrey and I worked on that. And Audrey, please jump in. But I think it has been really useful because it it was holistic. It included all guides, all videos, all modules. And when I say module, I mean a workshop. So I think it's nice to have a menu of options for people to look at, so they'll immediately know, all right, do we have this or we not have that? Audrey, what would you say?
Yeah, and so it also included our instructional websites. So we were able to use that to help faculty when they were developing instruction for the fall semester. We could say, well, we think that these online modules or these videos would be really great for your students. And that would jumpstart the instructional process so that it would enable us to not have to go over certain things, that students would already have that information in their pocket, for instance.
The basics.
Okay, we've got about 5 more minutes for questions, so I'll just keep going here. Another question for Esther. You mentioned offering title or resource overlap analysis for your members. How was this accomplished?
So we used Alma's overlap analysis tool. We only used it for serials for databases. It basically compares titles and whole years of coverage for resources in Alma. It's not as nuanced. If you're familiar with the Serial Solutions overlap tool, it's not quite as nuanced, but it's good enough to it was good enough for our purposes.
Okay, a question for Stephanie. As a subject liaison, do you feel that the pandemic brought librarians and faculty closer together, and if so, how?
That's a really good question.
It is.
I would say, yeah, in some ways it did. I have spent more time talking to faculty in the English department, both over Teams and online, and on the phone, than I did in previous semesters, which maybe says I'm actually sort of new to being a liaison librarian. So I don't maybe have the relationships that are forged over the years that my colleagues might, like Audrey might. So I did notice a marked increase in my communications with faculty, and we did I did bond a little with some of them over anxieties, and I also took a little bit of yelling, but it all came from a place of wanting to help students. So I would say, yeah, definitely there was some increased communication and increased relationship sort of building. So thank you for the question.
We've got a hand raised. Jean, I'm trying to unmute you.
Unmute. I just was
Go
waiting
ahead.
till you called my name.
Go ahead with your question.
we have found at our institution that we are part of Zoom classes, and we have continued to be a part of classes, but professors tend to think of us as guest lecturers, and we don't want to be a boring speaker, so who doesn't do anything with class. So it's been interesting because one of the things that we've had to do between us who normally teach in a structured program is to go through and say, if we do this activity, and this activity, we need these privileges, and we need to talk to the professor about making us co-instructors in our cases so that we can do this, this, and this. And I wondered if other people were finding that, we have an environment where professors are doing what they don't want to do, and they do what all of us do, which is, I want more control over this, so I'm not going to give you much because I'm just feeling unsure myself. And being more conscious of what we have to have in terms of permissions in courseware to do what we need to do. Anybody can take it.
Well, that's a good question, and I'm a little bit unsure of how to answer it. So our instructional efforts have been to obviously be a one-shot deal most often. And we try to engage students in the learning process by adding activities. So we've been focused a lot on trying to do that, to get them to start to think critically about what we've taught them. Does that make sense? And does that answer your question?
I will say this though, for example, we tried that and we got it to work, but we did have to say, for example, again, we have to be co-instructor, because if we put people in breakout rooms and want them to come back and discuss something that we've assigned in class, if the professor has not given us that permission, and it's really awkward to do it midstream, if the professor doesn't give us that permission in the beginning and understand that that's what we're going to do with it, then there's a problem. And like I say, I think it's led to a lot of us really being clear at the beginning of saying, we need to do this, therefore we need to turn on this.
Right.
In a way we've never done before.
So we have a online instruction request form. So I don't know if you guys do that or not, but so that would be a place to say things like that.
Okay, we had one more question, but I think the system's going to knock us out in about 2 minutes. So just so you know, this is for Gabi. How did you manage reporting out how much work and content was opened up for COVID-19 so that the library can show the amount of work that COVID added to our plates? That's a really good question.
That's a really good question. And if people have good answers, I'd love to hear them too. I mean, it was little things. Our campus was really good at making that clear at the very beginning that we should be keeping track of the time and extra expenditures, because campus is having to invest a lot of extra resources in terms of, buying personal protective equipment and that sort of thing. But for the libraries, I think it was more, we have our tracking for certain funds. So the purchase on demand funds are separate. So that's where we're able to kind of see the volume increase in specific funds. And then for the resources, a lot of them were set up as trials. And we did that intentionally, both to make it clear to people that some of that access was temporary, but also to kind of capture the work and the things that we added because of COVID or as on a temporary basis. And as part of our trial workflow. So those are just a couple of examples. But I think it's the harder things to capture are, the people and the time that we kind of expended energy doing different things. That's a lot harder to think about an answer.
Right. Okay, I think that's all the time we have. Great job, speakers. This was very interesting.
Thank you. I just want to jump in and say all of our contact info is right here. It's also available. Our slides are available to download. We have some links and further reading right here. So Just letting you know.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for your help.
Thank you. Yes, excellent.